Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Russell Martin. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, and blog articles. Our goal is that you are inspired, encouraged, and the things that you hear on this podcast can equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you're serving in. Well, today you get to sit down with all three of the hosts.
As well as Craig Rochelle.
As well as Craig Rochelle.
That'd be crazy, though.
Well, yeah, that would be bucket list goals there, I guess. But so we are all coming on today to kind of do a roundtable discussion that we're going to start doing occasionally throughout the podcast. If you are a longtime listener, you might have noticed that the recap episodes haven't happened this year, and we're trying to swap things up and do some different things. And so we're thinking we're going to try some roundtables this year and just have us three and maybe some guests that we invite along the way to have conversations with us to where we can talk through different issues. And with this being the second podcast episode of 2024, last week I interviewed Jim and we talked about financial care and like planning for your future with retirement and everything else. This episode, we are talking about planning your year. And so, of course, when we say planning your year, we're looking at 2024. But that has a lot of things involved in it, including 2 different school years, a summer that has a lot of activities, I'm sure. And it seems like there's a lot of things that we can talk about. So, Russell, take it over, and we'll get going from there.
So the first obvious thing that you're probably thinking is that shouldn't we be planning or do we already have done this? And yes, it's probably wise to think about planning 2024 before 2024. But also we know that you're always thinking of planning. And so what we're trying to do is give you some things today. You may already have some things planned out for from now until Easter. I hope you do. But also another reality is sometimes you don't. But it is that time to start thinking not just about your spring, but to be thinking about summer, to be thinking about fall. Like, what is your whole scope and sequence for your whole entire year here? So that was one of the first questions I want to ask you guys is as you come to a January, it's kind of a dead time. I mean, summer is busy, fall is real busy, but you do kind of have this kind of January, February. There's a few things going on, but if there's a winter retreats or some things like that. But all in all, it's probably the slowest time of the year. You finish Christmas, haven't gotten to Easter. As you have time to reflect during this time and you're thinking, what are some of those big things those big rocks, they talk about when you're planning your Stephen Covey or whatever like that. What are the big rocks? So for y'all, what are your big rocks calendar-wise that you're already starting to put in place? You may not have your weeks scheduled as far as what series you're doing or anything like that, or your specific mission trips, but what are your big rocks that you're already putting into place? Brent, go ahead.
Yeah, so especially with us, we've kind of transitioned what our big rocks look like, if that makes sense. And we used to, of course, like most people, say that our big rocks were, church camp, and our big rocks were our mission trip. And then we would have like the different, I guess, events that would come up throughout the year. And we've really started to take a shift away from that because we have decided that the big rocks in our ministry need to be a few key things that we do on an annual basis. And so our big rocks now are scope and sequence, are basically coming up with this idea of like, hey, we have a curriculum roadmap start to finish of like from the 6th grade to 12th grade, they are going to hit and learn all of these different things. And so we look at that every year. There are some that stay fairly concrete. Our sixth grade and our seventh and eighth grade do the same things almost every year, but they're very, very foundational elements. And then high school, we have a 4-year rotation of things that we go through. And so putting that together, establishing the method, or the does this still apply? Is this still worth talking about? We use January and February to kind of reassess that. And then we typically also do a focus word for the year. And so our focus word, we always start in January, and it's kind of our theme for the year. In the spring, we use it just as a way to kind of get the year going, and in the fall, we do our T-shirts based around the theme for the year, and it's kind of a refresher after everybody's gone for the summer, to where we can pick back up and keep rolling. And so our theme for this year is 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 14 and 15, talking about who's taught you in the faith, now continue in it. And so our theme this year is continue. And so we're going to be going through and doing a bunch of different things with that. And we try to find 2 or 3 things, occasionally where we can really, really focus in and dwell on the fact of like, what would this mean if we like expanded this concept and brought it out? And so for the continue theme this year, we're looking at incentivizing note taking, where we are going to encourage and challenge our students to take notes. We are going to prioritize discipleship, or student on student discipleship. And so we are going to work on developing leaders where they can come in and they can be the forefront of our discipleship process, with us in the background being the aides or the assistants to them being the primary voice. And then finally, just this fire and this fact of like just pushing them to have the desire to continue in their faith, understanding that it's not a stagnant point, it's not somewhere they stay, it's somewhere where they are right now and they have to keep moving. And so those are the 3 things that we're really focusing on this year, and I'm excited for them. But that's kind of our big rocks. We've kind of transitioned away from like, oh, this is our big event, to, oh, how are we incorporating this theme into everything that we do this year?
So, and there's several things I want to dive in on that, but I'm going to let David answer first. So, David, how do you look at those big rocks? What are those key kind of foundational things that you're thinking of January, February, as you're planning out for the rest of your year?
Yeah, so very similar. We have also moved away from the kind of big, massive events. Those are still core, and they're still part of our ministry. And it really, I kind of laughed as I was listening to Brent share their model, because of course ours is going to be fairly similar. We're in the same area and we're in the same denomination, and well, I mean, all 3 of us are, but even if we are non-denominational, we're still very much Wesleyan. That hasn't changed in any way, but very similar in that perspective. We've really started to look at what's the core DNA of our student ministry, and what is speaking to our students in today's culture. I think especially with COVID, we've saw such a shift away from traditional ministry, and so it's all been about how do we push past the temptation to want to just do everything online and not actually go to church or go to I know that's a church-wide thing that many of us are struggling with, but one of the big things that we have focused on this year is this idea of who's your 10, and ultimately it's 10 people that you can pray for, 10 people that you can show acts of kindness towards, and 10 people that you can ultimately share the gospel with and invite them to church. And so those have been the main thing that we've been focusing on. We have a share night once a month where we get to check in with the students and see how that's going, and how we can encourage and pray for the different people that are on their heart and the people that they're ministering to, which has been a really cool evaluation tool for us, to know exactly where they are and where their struggles are, and how we as a student ministry, as well as our student leadership team, can pour back into these students as they pour out into their community and their school. And that's been one of the coolest things for us Another thing from a series standpoint that we are diving into this semester is looking at the hot topic um, scenarios that social media is providing. A lot of these TikTok reels and Twitter conversations are very much challenging core scripture and saying, did God really say this, and did God really want it this way, or is the Bible really written by God, or is it inerrant, is it not, and then the bigger stuff like doubt and deconstruction and it's become very much a movement where we have looked at our students and looked at the culture here in Snyder, being a smaller town and stuff, but at the same time, they are still wrestling with some of these things, and so we think it's important for us to lead the charge as much as we can as these students are wrestling with these things and having a really open conversation. So we did something similar to this about 4 years ago, but obviously, especially post COVID, technology has become as education based on social media, especially, has become so um, overly saturated, I would say, to a point where I think it's become even more confusing than it already was for a lot of these students. And so, really diving into those topics and trying to combat, let's be honest, combat some of the, I would say, dangerous like TikTok theology type things. So, and having an open conversation. And we're really, really excited about that series and where it's going to take us. And it'd be really cool to see how the students respond. And hopefully, we equip them with the tools to know how to respond to those things, because they're not only asking those questions, but they are being asked those questions. And so I think it's important for us to know how to handle those in a healthy way and in a way that doesn't push people away from Jesus, but instead points them to Jesus. So, long-winded answer, but yeah, that's where we are.
I like how you said TikTok theology, because I think one, it kind of flows, um, and two, like there's the difference because what 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, Google still, YouTube still stands to be the second largest search engine. Um, I know people who have fixed cars, have remodeled houses because they type in, "How do you do this?" And the first thing that pops up is a YouTube video. We have a lady in our church who does our maintenance and our custodial stuff, and she's taking apart a water fountain and putting it back together because she was like, "Oh, I found it on YouTube." Um, but at that point, you searched for the answers, right? Like you typed in the deal and then you found. And with TikTok, with social media, with Facebook, and this is nothing new, but those answers are coming to you, and we have to know how to be curators of that content. Like there's so much information coming. How do we create, and how do we teach our students to both curate and create and bring those things together, and be able to sift through and go, hey, this is all bull. This is all that doesn't fit with what I believe or what I know to be true. Um, but their friends are seeing that, and it's just coming to them. And oh, well, the Bible says this, or the Bible says this, or does it really? And how do we search through that? But what I like about both of y'all's answers is, and we kind of jumped to this, is I said, "What are your big rocks?" And both of y'all said, "Let's redefine our rocks." Um, because there are so many things that we have always held on to. This is core. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, summer we have this event, and we have this, and we have this, and how do we work these things in? But I like the fact that we're starting to ask, and we are becoming more mainstream asking: is the way we've always done it good? Is it helpful? Is it right? Is it true? Did it serve a purpose for a period of time? And now we're kind of rethinking that. So, Brent, you were sharing about doing your mission trips and how y'all went from the week long mission trip that doesn't fit your group anymore, or all of your group. Um, and so kind of redefining that rock. So what else would y'all say about kind of redefining those priorities? Because January and February is a good time to do that, to kind of rethink. But what else would you say about redefining those priorities? Y'all can, either one can jump in, whatever.
Well, I think that that's a first and foremost, you have to have something to guide it off of. If you're just willy nilly throwing, oh, like we're going to change this, we're going to change this, we're going to change this, all this stuff, that doesn't necessarily have any credence, and it's not going to work for a tremendously long time because you're going to change everything. And then like 2 to 3 years down the road, you're going to realize that all the things you changed have no rhyme or reason. And then you're in the same wheelhouse again. And so, unless you have that guiding factor or that, for lack of a better term, filter that you're funneling everything through, you really don't have a focus point on what you're trying to do. And so with ours, we just kind of adopted our church's mission statement as our funnel or our focal point. And so that's love God, love people, offer Christ. And so, like, everything we do, we are trying to funnel through that lens. Does it love people? Does it love God? And does it offer Jesus? And so our focal point is really, really to go after those things. And we get to the point a lot of times to where it's like, like this, I mean, sure, it's fun to go do like XYZ, but like, is it really worth it? Like, is it worth the man hours? Is it worth the time? Are the students really bought into this, or would they come to something else that would be more meaningful? And so having these different discussions and having these different things can really kind of even allow you to have kind of reassessment periods where we're kind of, I mean, I'll admit last year we kind of got a little lackadaisical in our Sunday school approach because we're like, the kids are all dog tired anyways. They show up because their parents drag them, kind of thing like that. And I really kind of got convicted about that at the end of last year, and we're switching that up this year. Is like, we have some kids that come to Sunday school that's like you said earlier, Russell, that's the hour that they can give. And so we're going to make the most of that time, and we're going to really, really try to hit deep with that as well. And so we're trying to be intentional with how we focus and how we plan everything, from how kids enter the door to who's on the worship team to how kids are involved in church, outside of church, and inside of church. And we're trying to use that as a filter to incorporate everything that we do. And if you are listening to this and you don't have that like funnel to put everything in, you need to sit down with your top leaders. You need to sit down with a couple of your students and maybe a couple parents and maybe even your pastor. And you need to say, hey, all right, what is our focus? Like, if we have a goal for this ministry, what is it? You should have a mission statement, but then it's okay to have a challenge or a goal as a group as well. And so, like, we adopted one from Kenny and Elle Campbell as far as like our volunteers. Our volunteers have a goal or a focus that's still on point with our mission statement, but it's different. And so we stole the we win when a student takes a step forward in their faith. And we've used that for years now, but it is something that is really, really easy to get a group of people behind and move forward as a unit. And so we have different elements, different strategies, different functions, but they all funnel into that mindset of, does it love God? Does it love people? Are we offering Jesus? And I think that is kind of how you have to use this time of reassessment to focus on. You really have to sit down, especially in these weeks or months where you might not have a ton of stuff going on, and say, why are we doing the things that we're doing, and is there any reason to them? Because if I'm opening the doors to the church just for the kids to show up and drink a Coke and leave, like, they can drink a Coke at home. It sounds like lazy, I guess, in some regards, but like it's something that needs to be addressed.
Or you could do that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, somebody just opened a popcorn shop in our community, and so one of the things I'm planning on doing is just doing, hey, especially during the summer, like, hey, come hang out and do that. Like, so at least it changes the shift where you're at least going on their turf. You're not having them come to you. So what is that purpose of? So I do have I'll always have follow-up questions, but I want to give David a chance to answer, talking about more about redefining your rock. I mean, we could put these rocks in place, but do you have anything else about kind of what are those questions you're asking now that you didn't ask 5 years ago, before COVID, or even last year or whatever?
That's a good question.
That's a really good question. Because, especially as Methodists, we have a method to everything that we do, and most of the time it's traditional model, right? Like, this is who we are, this is what we want to see, this is the goal. And ultimately, the only thing that shifts is being as mindful as possible to who our students are today. I think sometimes, like, I'm in my 10th year here, and it's easy to look sometimes at what we did 5 years ago, 7 years ago, even 10 years ago, and say, yeah, that was really, really successful and it worked in Snyder, Texas. But what worked 10 years ago for our students in Snyder, Texas, to what worked 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and today are very different things. And so we are constantly reevaluating who are our students today and what do they need. And so that's one of the big questions we have with our student leaders, is where are you guys today? And that's been one of the coolest things for us from a reevaluation standpoint, is having our share night. And I would encourage anybody who's listening that maybe, I mean, you don't have to adopt it in the same way that we do by any means, but have an opportunity to kind of do like an open mic night testimony kind of thing, once a quarter even, where your students get to take the stage and talk about what they're doing, because we spend so much time encouraging our students to get out there and share the gospel, in a very similar way to Brent's church. Our core mission statement as a church is to love God with all that we are, make love people with all that we have, and make disciples with all we do. We are, we have, we do, and everything filters between those three things: loving God, loving others, and making disciples. And as long as we're doing those three things, it can look different for, and so our events, we'll look at our events and say, is this a love God event, is this a love others event, or is this a discipleship event? Is this outreach, is it, that kind of thing. And so always filtering those things. And so for us, one of the biggest wins that I think we've seen is, it also helps us having these share nights, is it also helps us to see, are they regurgitating what we're teaching them? If we're teaching them to be disciples, are they getting it? And when they get up there and say, hey, I tried this thing, I tried this tool, I tried this resource, or when I'm reading my Bible, I tried this specific Bible study method when we sat down for coffee. We've got a couple of students that have a Bible study at the coffee shop, stuff like that, where they're like, hey, we took the 5 P's and we were teaching it, and it was really cool because the first one they did, they wrote down the 5 P's out. It wasn't totally wrong, but it was kind of like out of order, and they were struggling with the getting it. It really doesn't matter the order, but it was one of those things. To them, they were like, oh my gosh, we don't have the order right, and so they freaked out. And it was one of those things where so they're texting me in the middle of it like, how's it supposed to be? And I was like, open scripture, what does it say, what are you getting out of it, what's the practical, how can you turn it into an application kind of thing? And they're like, oh, okay. But it was really cool to see after that. Then when we had our share night, they had brought up that Bible study, and how the first time they kind of panicked a little bit, but they were able to kind of push through it. And by the second week, they had a couple more students that had come in, and I guess what they had taught those students, they had went off to another friend and taught that. And so it was very much a multiplication thing, where they were like, hey, we tried this principle, or we tried this Bible study method, we taught them, they went off and taught a friend, and now their Bible study is about 10 to 12 people. But it's been really cool to see how that's worked, and other students do different things with their giftings, but it's been a really cool opportunity for us to evaluate what's working and what's not, and actually hear them share from their heart how God is working in their life. And so for us, that's been probably the coolest tool for us to see what has changed, especially in this I know it's not technically post-COVID, but kind of post-COVID world.
Yep. Well, we had, I think Brent got annoyed with me for a little bit, because my question for everybody when we first started after COVID, it was, what have you stopped doing that you'll never do again, and what have you started doing that you never stop? Um, and what's interesting is I do want to start revisiting that question a little bit now that we are, 2024. We're 4 years after kind of the heart of all that going on. 3 years after that, and what actually changed? What did you say? I'll never do this again, and you've gotten back into doing that, or what did you say? I'll always do this, and you've kind of, I always thought we would always be broadcast doing all of our services online for our youth stuff and everything like that, and we don't. Like everybody's able to get back. We don't do that anymore. But those type of things. One of the things I think is interesting, and excuse my listeners, excuse me a little bit. We're going to get a little theological within our denomination, but we are all kind of a Wesleyan deal. And I had somebody brought up to me and says, um, for a denomination or for a movement that talks about being, moved by the Holy Spirit and a fresh expression of what the Holy Spirit's doing in Wesleyanism, and then we're so tied to liturgy and calendar and this type of stuff. And so, and that's the I think we can get so, like you said, so stuck in those methods of, well, this worked. And this is not just a Methodist thing. This is, everybody gets into habits. You call it a habit, you call it a tradition, you call it what we did before. We never did it that way before, or we've always done it this way. And I think taking this time at the beginning helps us to reevaluate and go, okay, what are we doing because we've always done it? What are we doing because of our tradition or whatever like that? And what is God trying to do something new, and we're not allowing that to happen because we've always done it, and this worked when this worked 2 years ago, because it may not work that quickly. So
yeah, to that point, that's something that God really convicted me of at a conference. We went to the Right Now Media Conference in Dallas, and it's something that I used to preach a lot, and I don't know when I stopped. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, to your point of, sometimes we think we're going to do these certain things forever and ever, and then we just stop. And my wife has reminded me a lot of things that I preached for a long time, that somewhere along the line I got off of it, and she was like, I think you need to get back to those things, those core important foundational things. And but one of the big things that I felt God was convicting, especially our church, but it was like, I mean, everyone we talked to, it was like, it seemed like that was the theme, even though it wasn't intended to be the theme, was that every speaker talked about how we as churches, we as ministries, especially in youth ministry, we will come up with a event, or we'll come up with the programming of some sort, and we'll get really, really excited about it. We'll pour out our resources, and we'll do all the research and all the different things, and hype up it and make announcement videos and all kinds of things about it. And we'll say, God, please, when we do finally stop and pray, because that's one of the things that we forget most of the time, is we say, okay, God, we've done all the work. Now we just hope that you will show up and bless this event, bless this program, bless where all the work that we have done. And somewhere along the line, we stopped asking God, how do you want to be worshiped? What do you want for our church? What do you want for our resources? How do you want us to steward this incredible place and this building and these people that you have blessed us with? Where is the Holy Spirit moving? And can we be a part of what you're doing, not the other way around? And so we become, as a church, and I think this is the Big C church here, is we've become preference-led, not Holy Spirit-led. And I think we pretend like we're Holy Spirit-led when we're not.
Well, and I think this is all important with kind of starting your year. My one of my classes I was taking, we were talking about the fact, he was like, no matter what culture you go into, whether it's Snyder, Texas, or whether it's Huffman, or whether that's Zimbabwe, or whether that's South America, or wherever, like, God's already at work. God's already at work there. He's already been working there. He's working in their culture. He's working in their music. He's working in their stories. He's working in their priorities and all those things. He's already at work there. You're not bringing God to, we talk about that, I'm bringing God to the people. God's already there. We're helping them to realize and see, okay, you label it this way, but that's really God. And so for us Wesleyans, that's going to be prevenient grace. Like, that grace is already working, not just in the heart of the person, but in that culture. And so how do we do that? And so when we do that, when we come in and say, God, I'm doing this, I'm coming in with my program and I'm doing this, bless it. And God's like, that's great. But when you're done playing around, here's what I've been doing for 50 years already in this community. Here's what I've been doing for 10 years in this family. Um, and when you're done messing around, this is what I want you to do. And it was that verse, and I saw it on as a Facebook thing, but it talked about how some plant, some grow, some harvest, some do this. Like you're only a part of that. We're only a part of that. And so, kind of getting that mindset as we begin this new year and looking at, maybe that's something that you need to ask your church, or you need to ask your youth, or you need to ask your adults or your parents. Where do you see God working in your school, in your soccer team, in your PTA, in your church, in your Bible study, in your families? Like, are we attuned to that? And are we willing to set aside everything we have to go, oh, God, that's a much better idea than I had. Let's go with that. And part of that happens, I think, when you take that time in January is just a good time to do it. August is another good time to do this. These same questions is probably good before you're getting in the school year, but January is just a good time for us to ask these questions. Is how are we doing that? And so that redefining your rocks was good. There's a book that I saw called Atomic Habits, and y'all kind of both have reminded me of this, that when you take either filtering things through a mission statement or having a key word like Brent had for his group for the year, like that can change everything else you do. One of the things that's been stuck in my head is family first for us. And so that's church family and that's your family. And how do we as a church, how are we fighting against, how are we programming against the family? How are we hurting family with things that we are doing for God? Let that sink in. How are we hurting our families with things that we are doing for God? How does the church hurt families? And so, it's all innocuous. It's all, we don't intend to, but our programming, our schedules, you need to be up here and do this on this time, meet from this time to this time that I set, that we have. Well, maybe that's not the best. And so I think those are definitely things to go. So as you're looking at, one of the things Brent brought up was the scope and sequence, and that's one thing we wanted to hit on today was when you're looking at that, when you're taking those things into account, how do you kind of plan out what you're wanting your students, your families, your students to learn? And this is going to be different for everybody because some people are going to have Sunday school and they're going to have Sunday night and they're going to have Wednesday. And so some groups are going to have just one time when all their groups meet. And so how do you kind of do that when you're kind of looking at, okay, for the next year, Brent, we're focusing on this word, but you also talked about your scope and sequence for your 6th and 7th and 8th graders and those things. So Brent, I'll let you go kind of take that first and kind of boil your stuff into a short, synopsis of your scope and sequence for your kids.
Yeah, so our 6th grade is obviously when we begin with our students, and 6th grade has always been foundational. We are probably we always joke and say we're the most unmethodist Methodist church ever. But with that, like, we don't do a lot of the standard practices that are in a lot of different Methodist churches. It's a pretty large thing within Methodist churches to do confirmation class and stuff like that. And a lot of times that takes up the 6th grade year. And so confirmation class is basically just you're confirming what you have previously said you believed. And so with that, we focus on just using the foundational elements of our faith as the basis for the year on our 6th graders. So we talk about who God is, who Jesus is, what did they both do, who's the Holy Spirit, how is that active and living, what is the church, what are the sacraments, what are all the different foundational points of our faith. And then 7th and 8th grade, we alternate years, and we do 1 year in the Old Testament and we do 1 year in the New Testament. And we look at story after story and walk through the Old Testament and walk through the New Testament and try to build that biblical knowledge and understanding. Maybe it's not going to sink in crazy thick, but at least when we say names in the Bible or stories in the Bible, they can be like, oh yeah, I remember that one, kind of thing. And so then
because that doesn't exist currently. Like, I just want to interject, to jump in for a minute. Like, I can't now go and say Moses or Noah to a class of sixth graders in a school somewhere and then have any confidence that they know what I'm talking about. Some will, but I can't guarantee. And so I just wanted to interject and jump in and say, like, guys, like, this is, I'm pointing to Brent. This is important, and I would actually go with your children's ministry too and talk to them about the scope and sequence for those key foundational stories. But we are doing that with our kids are going through, they're just doing Bible stories. Right on board Jesus Bible stories like I used to get growing up, and think we've gotten away from that. Anyway, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to jump in and say, like, that is not information that you can assume even your church kids know. And if you can review it and go over it, that is good. So Brent's going to tell us how he continues to do that.
Yeah. So then what we do with the high school is we spend a year with focal points on the primary stuff that we do in August. When we hit the ground running for the school year, we focus on 4 different things for each of the years. And it really goes back to the 4 foundational questions that we ask as people or as humans. And they're questions that focus around origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Basically, where did we come from? Why are we here? What am I here for? And then where do we go after we die? And so we go through all these different things. This year is our purpose year, or the meaning, basically. And so we're going through, and we spent this fall talking all about the purpose of being here, our purpose as a Christian, what we are called to do. And then we allowed that to kind of bleed into our focus for this year, which is continuing in what we know. And so we do those in the fall. And then for the spring, we kind of really try to hit the ground running with whatever focal point we have for the year. And so we really, like I said, 6th grade's foundational. 7th and 8th grade is like hard text, like we're going to look at this and we're going to study. And then once we have that base knowledge of foundational elements of Christianity, Old Testament, New Testament, then we go into the less physical aspects of our faith. What is doubt? How do we handle that? What is spiritual warfare? Like, what are all these things that are going on that we can't physically touch, that don't have a tangible effect to them, that we need that grounding and we need that base level understanding for us to accomplish as we move on. And so that's basically what we do. Every spring, which we start next week, every spring we either start with a question series or we do a relationship series, and that's the first thing we do right off the bat. And those are 2 of the things that are concrete. This year is question series. We did relations last year. And so I basically just let the high school kids ask questions, and I do my best to answer all of the questions with biblical backing, so they can have answers to whatever there is currently on their mind. Just to give kind of some groundwork on where to start. And then a lot of times I use those questions to kind of orient the direction for the remainder of the semester as well.
So you gave us kind of a scope and sequence for that. Now, is that Sunday morning? Is that Wednesday night? What does that look like?
That's a good, I didn't mention that. So that is all Wednesday nights for us. We do Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings is just going to be Bible for a long time. So we just finished reading 2 Timothy on purpose because our theme is out of 2 Timothy for this upcoming year. We are going to start back and revisit a series that we haven't done in a couple years on how to, like, what is the Bible? Why is the Bible categorized like it is? What is a canon? All of those fun questions. And we're going to use that for the next couple weeks as we kind of determine what books to touch on next. But we are literally reading the Bible or studying the Bible as a book over Sunday school.
Um, yeah, we did something similar, but I'm gonna let David kind of give us their kind of shakedown of how y'all look at all of
Yeah,
that.
very similar. We most of our things happen on Wednesday night as well. We do have Sunday morning Bible studies. Those are very much scriptural. We've done some topical stuff on Sunday mornings, but we tend to like to open the Bible and just see what it says. So we have been this last semester, the fall semester, we put a focus on a little bit more topical stuff because we marched through the book of James very, very deep. Um, we talked about all the history that led to James. Who is James? Who is it written to? Our, especially when you look at the book of James, and especially once you get into like chapter 2 and 3 and 4, James is one of the most like on the nose, like he pulls no punches whatsoever in the book of James. And so for them to understand and really wrestle and grapple with these things that are being taught in the book of James, you have to understand who the audience is intended, and we broke down that that is very much to us, and so what can we learn and grow from, and so when you have that context around um, the Bible study. And so for us, that was a big part of our fall, was all about let's really drive context and help them understand who who the main players are inside these passages that we're reading. Who is it intended to? Like, let's really dive in and ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and get as much as we can in this season, and then use that to apply into your daily devotional time, any kind of scriptural reading that you do. And I think it's been a really cool thing for us. And so that was the biggest takeaway and focus for this year, outside of course, our Who's Your 10 initiative and the work that we're doing through that. And so our biggest thing has always been we want to make these students really, really well grounded students who love Jesus, and that their faith is something that matters to them, not just today, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when their kids have the opportunity to sit in the very seats that they're sitting now, that their faith is important to them, and that their kids get the same opportunities that they're getting now. And if we could do that, it really comes down to intergenerational. And so that's another big focus that we're doing. We've shifted a little bit of how we're going to handle our Wednesday nights to where we're staggering our different ministries, so that our junior high students can pour into our kids, our high school students can pour into our junior high ministry, and our young adults can pour into our high school students. And so that there's a little bit more of this cyclical, intergenerational mentoring and pouring into, and giving everybody ownership in that. And so that's a big thing that we're trying this year. We actually start it tonight, and so it'll be really cool to see how our people respond to that. There's been a lot of excitement, especially for some of our young adults that never really thought that they were at a stage where they can pour into students, and so for some of our kids that now we have some that have always helped out with our kids ministry, and they're pumped just to get more opportunities to do that. But for some of our others, they're stepping into something that they've never tried before, outside of like VBS and some of those other like big rock things that are most churches do. And so, which again, VBS is another one of those things that people have rethought, which is kind of cool. And so that's the biggest thing that we're doing in that realm. I guess very similar to other churches. But I think the thing that I'm most excited about is seeing how this intergenerational mentoring works out, and seeing both those that are being poured into, as well as those who are pouring into the generations younger than them, and seeing how we can all come together and serve. I think is going to be a really, really cool opportunity for our church.
Yeah, and I think it's I think I did an interview with Sam Halverson talking about one body, and this is way back, and we can put it in the show notes. But that was his big emphasis was that intergenerational. We don't need to have the only time the youth see the main sanctuary is when they graduate, and then they go off and they're like they come back from school and they're like, we've never been here, we don't know what to do in here. um, and but I like that with all of those scales. Like, if you know something, if I know how to play five notes on the piano, I may not be a master piano player, but if I know how to play five notes, I can at least teach you how to play five notes. I can't teach you how to play a concerto or a sonata, but I can teach you how to play those five notes. I can teach you how to play, and you see that when you go in at any church and you hear down the hall, you hear, chopsticks being played or something like that. What's cool about that is somebody who knows how to play chopsticks. They may not can play Mozart, but they can play chopsticks. They taught someone else how to play chopsticks, it's a silly kind of example, but we don't think about that was one of my challenges getting volunteers. It's like, well, I don't know enough about the Bible. I was like, you don't have to know. One, I'm giving you everything. I just need you to be a positive influence in the lives of these students. And it was amazing after a couple of weeks, and they started studying more, and they were like, oh, well, I do want to lead. I do want to do this. Um, we have a very similar thing here. We do have a Wednesday night, Sunday morning. Um, and the way that I've always kind of looked at it is I go back to Doug Field's Purpose Driven Youth Ministry, which is one of the first youth ministry books I read. And he talks about discipleship, evangelism, worship, service, um, and all those key elements. There's one more. But so for us, Wednesday night is discipleship and worship. Like, so that's small groups and worship. Sunday night is missions and fellowship and outreach. So Sunday night is going to be one-off events, and that could be a game night, that could be a canned food scavenger hunt, that could whatever it is. So kind of looking at those two, and then Sunday mornings, that's when we do like you do. We were using the Viva curriculum, which I had from years ago, but they have specific Bible book studies. They don't go through the whole book, but they focus on one book of the Bible for 4 to 8 weeks, depending on which one. Um, and it's very easy. One is very easy to help give to adults to help lead, but we're focusing straight in on. So Sunday morning is straight Bible study. Pulling it out using your curriculum, but the Bible study. And so in that way, I think we cover, and I think that's one of the things about scope and sequence that is important too, is not only your content, but your experiences. You have everybody in your group, you have the kid who doesn't want to play a game to save their life. Um, and you have the kids who will play games 24/7 all the time, no matter what. You have those who love big crowds, and then you have those who are smaller, want a more intimate deal. Um, we had a Thursday night Bible study that I led for my leaders. So I had high school leaders who were pouring into junior high, David, like you did. But we actually met on a Thursday night every other week um, at a restaurant, and we went through John Wesley's 22 or whatever questions. Like, that was our Bible study. Was how have you spent your money this week? Have you lied intentionally this week? Asking those questions. But it was cool because I had kids who would come to that on a Thursday night and never would come play a game, never would come to a big water night or color wars, wouldn't come to anything where there were sixth graders because they annoyed them. But they would come, they could set aside that 1 hour with a small group. And so that's one of my questions for y'all is how do y'all kind of plan your week, even your year, so that you have experiences that would minister to or provide the opportunity for connection with a variety of students? And David, you're shaking your head, so I'll let you go first, and then Brent
One
can
more thing
follow up
before
with you.
we
Oh,
jump
wait,
off
you're
the
good. Jump in.
intergenerational ministry thing. I just
Okay.
wanted to throw out, if y'all haven't heard of it, the Pray For Me campaign is really, really great in order to get things started if you're trying to do intergenerational stuff. And basically, it starts with a really, really simple method of, hey, we're going to have people in our congregation sign up to pray for the people, like in our student ministry and our children's ministry. And it is a one-on-one, like you get their name, you get a few things, like few tidbits of information about them, and they pray for them for the entire school year. And that's the foundational groundwork that you can do, and then that can lead into where that's like maybe a mentorship thing, or like if the family trusts that person, maybe for their birthday they can take them out to go do something or whatever. Like there's so many things that like that can roll off of, but it's literally like a intergenerational ministry moment that you can do right off the bat. That's really, really interesting. But there's tons of churches that use it. Pray for Me campaign, we'll have that in the show notes as well.
So
Sorry,
we
David.
do we're about to do confirmation. So we are going to do confirmation. One of the things I do is have mentors within that, and I have them. I say, when you commit to pray for this student, you're praying for them for a while, and my hope is that they'll continue to pray for them. So every year, if I have 15 kids in confirmation, then I have 15 people praying for them, and it's fun to see like them take on other confirmands, and so eventually they have 4 people they're praying for, and they'll pray for them for the rest of it until they graduate. That's what I want them to do. But it does create that intergenerational thing with that. So anyway, David, go ahead. We were talking about the kind of how do you create experiences for your variety, not just for kids to learn a variety of different things and have a scope and sequence for that, but also the experiences for those kids who are either shy or outgoing or whatever.
Funny enough, the reason why I was shaking my head was because I was actually going to also mention the Pray For Me campaign. We started it this last year, and what we did was we gave a picture and bio of every one of our kids and youth. It just talks about like silly stuff like my favorite candy is Skittles. Hint, hint. They like Skittles. Go buy them some Skittles. Little things like that because it makes their day. It's been really cool to see how many people just from a parent standpoint, because I think sometimes it's easy for us to get so programmed that we forget that we're parents too, or a lot of us are. I mean, I can't assume that for everybody, but for all of us here, we're parents. And when my 6-year-old comes up to me and says, look at this bag I got from Susie, and it's like a random book and a dinosaur and a car or something that he just loves, or here's another Ninja Turtle activity book. That's his thing, reading and activity books. That's his thing. And so when he gets this big huge chapter book and he gets to read it and he's super pumped about it, stuff like that, it's like I see from a parent standpoint that means the world to my son. And so we as a church, when we can pour into somebody else, especially some of those kids that we know have a rough home life, or maybe their family are economically not as blessed, for a kid to randomly receive a toy is a huge deal. And the same thing for the youth. Like, sometimes just to realize, especially in a tough week where maybe they're struggling with being bullied or something, or they're struggling with self-worth, and somebody says, hey, I was thinking about you this week, and so I went and got you this little gift card to Sonic and a little Devo book or something. I mean, whatever it might be, just that little bit makes a huge difference. So if you're one that hears, hey, pray for me, what is that, and look it up. Like I said, we'll have information, links and stuff to that in the show notes. There are several books and stuff that were written, but one of the best things that we did was actually having a picture and a bio to give to our entire leadership team as well, and we have it open to the church if they would like to be a part of that too. And some have really taken that on. It's been cool to see, especially for those that think, man, I don't have anything to offer, and to have a picture of a student and they can pray for very specific things. We one of the things that we do again for our share night is we'll write some of those things down, and when we know that, for example, I'm just going to use my son's name even though he's not in student ministry, Noah is struggling with a certain thing and he's got this friend and he's been really trying to pray for him. I can then take that back to our leadership team and I'll add it to their bio. Like, hey, they're working on this and this is the things that they're praying about and these are the people they're praying for. Join them in prayer. And then go ask them how it's going, because then you create accountability. You create more than just, okay, I'm praying for Noah Pruitt, and I see his face, and I don't really know what to pray for, but here's a few things that he likes, and I'm still praying for the same thing. 5 years from now, they're growing up, and so we have an opportunity to relay some of that information back to our leadership team and to anybody else who's doing our Pray For Me campaign, to know this is the specific things that they're working on today, and they urgently need prayer for these things today. And then, a couple of weeks from now, we'll update it again. And so I think being able to keep people up to date today really helps bridge that to a point where it's not long, because I'll be completely honest. When I look at the 4 people that I'm currently praying for, when I see those new needs that they have, I get to a point where I you can't help but like fall in love with these kids. You know what I mean? Like, you can't help but like see them and go, man, I prayer does some incredible things in us, right? And it encourages us to not just simply have a passive role in these kids' life. If I'm praying for them, I want to know that they're doing well, and it's a really cool opportunity for our parents, to take some ownership and say, hey, I'm praying for these 3 people. How are they actually doing? And can I help keep them accountable? And all of a sudden you start to see it what it does is breed compassion, for our people as they get to know these kids and our students, and it's really really cool opportunity. So I would actually really encourage you guys. I don't know if I answered your question in that, but I cannot say enough great things about Pray For Me campaign, and I'm glad that Brent also brought it up, because it's incredible ministry.
Yeah. So no, just I mean, I think all. I mean, that's something else though, that we're talking about things to do at the beginning of the year, and that's something to, again, either now or in August are kind of good starting points. This is a
Right.
good time to kind of say, hey, this is going to be a focus for us for the rest of this year. But kind of closing out, my thought was, um, as you're looking for, if you're looking at the different uh, kids in your youth group, are there things you consider as you are creating your experiences throughout your week or whatever like that, that kind of help to get everybody involved, to have something that everybody's uh, uh, you know takes part in? Like, so for us, we had our Wednesday night was a big night, bunch of kids, games, worship, game, all the stuff. But then Thursday night was at a restaurant, quiet, um, and even our Wednesday nights, our Sunday nights, we would do, one night would be Angry Birds night. We made vegetarian Angry Birds, and then we would do prayer stations, or we do coffee house, or things like that. So, what are just some of the considerations you think of whenever you're um, kind of coming up with and putting these rocks in, that go along with your focus that you're doing, that you kind of help get all kids involved?
I mean, I'm gonna sound old and a stickler when I say this, but is it bad to say that I don't? Because in the mindset of, I'm not planning my events around my students, I'm planning around what God has for my students. And I don't want that to sound holier than thou in any way, shape, or form, but like we set the precedent with how we plan things. And when 6th graders come in, they are coming in from a different ministry, and they come in from a different scenario. They come in with different rules, different everything, and they come into a well-established and well-focused group where, yes, there's time to hang out, but then there's a time to be chill, there's a time to be silent, and they adapt and they catch on really, really quickly. And by the time that they're late junior high or early high school, they're the ones that are modeling that behavior for everybody else. And so we have decided that, especially in how we function things, especially on Wednesdays and on Sunday mornings, it's not that we don't have time for games. We do have a relatively shorter schedule compared to others, but we just don't see it as a priority. And so we don't do them. We have a fun event every month, and we go out and do crazy things for those. This month is where my associate youth pastor is a big time theater nerd. She has a major in theater. She plans and orchestrates an entire murder mystery dinner. And like all the kids dress up and like they have to figure out who the person is at the end of it. I cook all the food, and like we have different kinds of games that we play and stuff like that. We take them paintballing. We take them to do all kinds of crazy stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, we try to be established and structured to the point to where they know when the fun is going to be and they know when the serious is going to be. And we don't allow those to over intersect, I guess, if that makes sense. Because I think, honestly, David, I think you said it last time we did a podcast together. You said what you win them with, you'll keep them with. Or something to that nature. And so
literally about to say the same thing. So, Brent and I are on the same.
We have a very, very, we have a very set structure when it comes to how we do things. And it's not necessarily set in the way of like, God, you better get in our lane or something to that nature, because that's not a good strategy to do. But we want to allow kids to focus in on the spiritual elements of church. And then we have fun outside of the building. Go ahead.
That's exactly what I was talking about. Like,
okay.
Not that you would do it all in one night.
Sure.
But just like when you look at what I'm saying is when you're looking at your overall spring semester, you provide opportunities.
Yeah. Okay.
You're going to have some kids. You're going to have some kids who aren't going to come.
Yeah.
They're going to come paintball. They're going to, after a while, they'll come to your deal.
Sure.
So that's all I'm saying is like you're offering opportunities on multiple levels for people to get involved.
Okay, misunderstood your question. That's totally fine. Yeah, in that regard, yes, we do. Our Wednesday nights are pretty serious. That's when like you can come and like you're gonna be challenged. You're gonna get answers. You're gonna ask questions. Hopefully, you're gonna spend time in worship. And we very, very much equate our fun activities to. They're typically longer. It's more than an hour. But we typically do one Saturday or one Saturday or one Sunday a month, and we go off and do something crazy or fun, stuff like that. So sorry, Miss.
That's good. And I think that's good though. I think you need to be clear, and this would be a note for everybody. Be clear about what an event or an activity or a service or a program is designed for, and tell that to your parents and your kids. I mean, you don't want to take all the mystery out of it, but like if the parent has a kid who's, all about the fun, their introduction to the youth group may be the paintball night or maybe the deal. And then while they're there, you make an intention to get them involved. But what you don't want, I would actually advise against doing is trying to put everything in one night. I mean, like you can have a get to know you game or something like that, but what you end up with, don't do the, or I would say don't do this. You can do whatever you want. Don't do the, we're going to do the yuck games and have them wash us off, but we have to do the worship service first, and then we'll do those things. Like, I mean, do a fun, in your youth week, if anybody does this, do a full fun night and then do a worship night. And you'll have some kids who come to the fun that don't go to worship. You'll have some youths in the worship, but but you don't have the kids who thought they were coming for the fun night and now they're doing the sit and worship night, and that just wasn't what they were expecting. So I think being clear with what something is designed to accomplish serves you better. No, not everybody will come to everything. Yes, some people will specifically choose not to come because of what you're doing, but more people will specifically choose to come because they know what to expect and they know what they're getting into when they come to that.
Yeah.
So, David?
We have a few students that literally show up to play flag football with us in February on Super Bowl Sunday, and they come to church camp, and that's it. Like,
yeah, I mean,
but do you have some? Do you have some who come to flag football and then do come to something else? I mean, there are going to be some of those.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. We have some that come to everything.
Unload pumpkins all the time. Yeah. I mean, we have some who came to unload pumpkins one year, and then they're like, "Hey, we could come back next week." So anyway, David, what were we going to say?
Yeah, very similar. It's really funny because we are one of the only youth ministries in town that does not put a priority on games, especially on a Wednesday night. We're very much like Brent's church, that I think there's always a time for everything and a season for everything. And so we do the same thing. We do fun events that are focused on those things. But when it comes to Wednesday nights, those are very much like, and our students like kind of pride on it because it's very much a worship service. We have a worship flow that comes with it. We've got worship, we've got a sermon time, and we've got our small group time. And it's something that they really enjoy, and they take a lot of ownership. That's another thing that we make a big priority on. It's very much a Wesleyan thing, but every member to ministry. And so what that means for us specifically is everyone gets an opportunity to have a role in some way, whether that's reading scripture or helping out with media and sound, or being on the worship team, or being a part of our video announcement team. And that's been one of the cool things that we added, is that used to myself or one of our adult leaders would give the announcements, and we thought, man, if we did video announcements and made them fun, and we added all the like the silly, like I'm an animator and graphic designer, so like I'm all for adding the extra little things. Like one of the things, it was really corny, but one of our seniors, and we paired a senior up with one of our seventh graders, because they had this like really weird, like playful relationship, and it was kind of funny the way that they did it. So this senior is really like witty and punny, and so he's a big guy, and then he's got this little guy, and he picks him up and says, man, our youth program is soaring through something in that sense. And so he was like, all right, David, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick him up and I'm going to throw him over my head, and then you're going to animate it and make it look like he literally goes through the roof, because our youth numbers are through the roof kind of thing. And I was like, okay, sounds fun. And so he's like modeling it, and as it happens, my son and a couple of other kids come up as we're filming, and I'll just say names. Kevin throws Dagan. No, it wasn't Dagan. It was one of our seventh graders. Anyway, he throws him up in the air, and we film it. And my son goes in and goes, "That's not a very good idea, Kevin. He's gonna hurt himself." And we all lost it, and we left it in the announcement video, because like all of a sudden so the way I animated it, he goes through the roof, and you just hear, "That's not a very good idea, Kevin," from this little kid. And it was hilarious. And it's just silly antics like that. But it got students that maybe don't feel comfortable being on a worship team, or maybe don't feel tech savvy or something like that. It's just another opportunity to give every single student a place and ownership in the running of our services on Wednesday nights. And the cool thing is, in doing so, we've even seen some students that enjoyed it so much now that they're starting to help with the announcement video for our Sunday mornings. And so Sunday mornings are getting to see some of those students, and even some of our kids step into that, and it's been really cool. So I think it just comes down to being intentional and saying, what are some things that you're passionate about, what are some things that you're gifted in, and how can we use that for the glory of God. And as long as we do that, again, like what Brent said, I say it all the time, it's my kind of my bread and butter phrase, if I have one, but it's what you win them with is what you win them to. And if all we do is give away iPads and do big games and big flashy things, what's going to happen when they leave youth ministry and all of a sudden they're not given anything, and all of a sudden now they have to make their faith real? What happens is they walk right outside the door, because they're like, this isn't what church is about, because I think church should be big and flashy. What happens when they don't get that anymore? And so there has to be substance. And so for us on a Wednesday night, like we put a huge emphasis on this is our grow time. This is our time to worship, and we'll have time for fun later. Not to say we don't do a game or two every once in a while, but
yeah. Well, and the flash again, like that should be the seasoning, the top, the last little bit, but shouldn't be what you focus. Like if you're going to lose something, lose that. Like if that's going to be the thing that doesn't get planned out well, let that get not planned out well. Well, we are pushing on our time, well over our time now, and so I'm going to turn it over to David. And David, would you close us out and send us on to next week?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening. We would be honored if you would share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media, or tag a specific episode that really stood out to you, or a favorite moment that happens on your favorite platform by using @TalkStudentMen. Finally, if you would like to be on the show in the future, we've had some really incredible guests. Craig Gershell's been hanging out with us this entire episode. What a treat, man. I loved what he had to say. Then please reach out to us.
It will happen.
It
one
will
day.
definitely. I'm just saying, if I call Brent and say I have Craig Gershell, I'm pretty sure he's going to get in his car and drive over. That's just happening. Not that we're that far away from each other, but anyway. Thank you, Craig, for your time. Pat him on the head. Actually, he's kind of tall, isn't he? Sorry. Please reach out to us on social media or send us an email to podcast@studentministryconversations.org. We'd love to set up a time for you to join us. As always, have a great week, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
See you later.
Bye.